normal circumstances, I'd be really excited to force people to know about things that I like. This is different. I kind of started off this year really rough, wrong way, whoops. Because I had some people that I looked up to pass away from cancer. I had one of my pets also pass away from cancer actually last August, I believe. And then my mom had a lot of health issues last spring. So at the beginning of this year, a lot of stuff was off, and it didn't help that the past 2 years I've been quite burnt out from doing schoolwork over the summer to catch up from 1 year that I got behind. So it's my senior year, I thought, so I want to do something that I know I'll enjoy. So when I first started my senior project, I wanted to do something biology, paleontology, or conservation related, because those are some things that I've been interested in. So I first had to look at biology, which wasn't really a good idea because it's too broad of a range for a project, really. And I also got immediately bored just reading into the first article that I read. So I thought that maybe paleontology might be a good senior project. And one thing I kind of realized is that my passion for paleontology has kind of died out over the years. I mean, it's still there, but it's not something I'm as passionate about anymore. So I decided to go with something conservation related. Conservation is something that's always been prevalent in my life, something that I've always enjoyed. So I knew I wasn't going to get burned out from working on something conservation related. But these are just a few examples of things that I saw throughout my childhood that were conservation, or at the very least kind of related to it, that introduced me. When I first start any project, I always start with my research questions, and I usually always do it on a piece of paper because you never know when the idea is going to pop up in your head, and you might forget it. So I first wrote down this really bad rough draft that's you could barely even read, but it definitely was the building blocks. From there, I kind of cleaned up my research questions so they're more finalized once I had more time to think more thoroughly about it. I also tried to have my notes show up there. Okay. It wasn't until the past year or so that I actually started doing digital notes, because I usually preferred handwritten notes, but I do prefer digital now because you can actually kind of like see the evolution of how much better your notes get over time, and it's a lot easier. But you can see that during the first part of when I first started my senior project, I mainly heavily researched things that I kind of missed, like nostalgic stuff, so like some of my shows that I watched when I was younger. And then over time, you can kind of see that in my notes that I started getting more serious about it. Like researching critical views about documentaries and stuff, which actually is a thing. Some people actually get upset about hearing really loud music in a documentary. It was also about 2 to 3 weeks after I proposed my senior project that I got a suspicious note on my bike. I don't know why someone put it there, but it definitely impacted my project process because it was semi-threatening. This is also what my bike looks like. I bike to school every morning, and because of the whole situation and because I normally bike to school, it definitely impacted a lot because I became a shut-in because I was scared because I didn't know why someone put a note on my bike. But I had to continue my project because I had been working for the past 2 years straight with no breaks during my schoolwork. So it's like, why do I stop now? I'm almost done. So I continued even though things were rough. Some of you maybe remember that that I invited some people over to watch some conservation themed things. And the reason why I did this was because I wanted to figure out why certain conservation education, public education themes work. Specifically towards Steve Irwin and Wildcrats, like what made them so memorable among the general public. And why do we look back so fondly at them? Fun fact, Wildcrats is actually still running, which was kind of a big surprise to me. But I learned through a bunch of research that apparently the reason why these two have stuck around, even though they're not as popular as they were today, is because of the amount of passion that was shown through their shows, as well as just their general respect for wildlife and others. So once I kind of figured out what makes things work, I decided to try my hand at it. So I decided to research migratory birds of Wisconsin. I don't know why I chose specifically migratory birds. It just came to me out of nowhere. So I chose specifically 3 species, which are tundra swans, dark-eyed juncos, also known as slate-colored juncos, and snow buntings. This is actually pulled straight from my rationale, so you can kind of read my reasoning back at the beginning of the year as to why I chose these birds. I was actually most excited about snow buntings ever since I learned about them 2 years ago, because I always thought of them as kind of like cute toasted marshmallows. But then one thing that kind of stood out to me was the tundra swans. So I decided to research a little bit more about swan species native to Wisconsin. I mean, mute swans aren't native, but I just want to learn more about them because, you know, swans kind of all look the same. It was also, once I got my research phase done, which is always easily my most favorite stage of any project, you can literally just ask one of the advisors and they'll know. I always save the last 2 weeks of my 6-week project for just the products. So it felt nice being able to research everything I wanted to and not feel rushed. But it was also at this time when my production phase started sometime in January that I wasn't feeling too good, mentally or physically, and apparently there was a reason for this. Apparently I had some blood draws done and I was not doing too good physically or mentally because of massive deficiency in vitamin D, which wasn't just from staying inside. This is something that's been happening for quite a while now, and it's just around this time the camel kind of broke its back. Well, it was the last straw, and my medications for my mental health stopped working, or at least not working as efficiently as they should have. And I was just tired all the time, which is, I guess, kind of good, because it was also at this time in my production phase that I started to document the birds that I wanted to. So, really convenient. So, now, some of you from last year may remember this guy, Raimi. He's probably going to be watching this later. If this rings a bell as well. I like to think of him as like my bird dealer, because he knows a lot about birds. Even the most like random things will know about it. So I had to pester him for like a good year to finally get his phone number and ask him, hey, where do I find tundra swans? Because I know that the other 2 birds that I'm also looking at are pretty easy to find. That's actually the range map for tundra swans from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And so I know you can't probably really read it in the back, but the reddish orange is the breeding range, so like spring and summer. And then the blue, which is probably gonna be harder to see back there, is the wintering and fall range. And then the yellow is just the migration. So you may be thinking, you know, you gotta time it just right. If you're looking for birds, they're just gonna be temporarily in a spot. But as it turns out, you can actually find tundra swans even during the migration range. Apparently there are some flocks that actually stay here for the winter, which was kind of surprising. This is all sightings from this year, from January through March in 2023 from public sightings. And the cool thing about this website that I use called eBird is that you can actually spot every single individual sighting that have been made publicly. And if you keep on zooming in, you can actually see all the hot spots and stuff that people have seen a bunch of tundra swans. And you can also look up other bird species. Yeah, there's he's right there. Yeah. These are also, once I kind of figured out where to look, I started looking for tundra swans, and I mainly looked for them up near Menasha, those 4 areas, and I didn't have any luck, any sign, no calls, nothing of tundra swans for weeks. They have been notorious to literally be gone like the wind, because they've been notorious for, if there's any slight warm air draft, they're known for just taking off with it and just leaving as fast as they've arrived. So it's a bit of a challenge finding them consistently. And after a couple months, I think it was in like sometime in March, I slowly started to give up because I've been looking for them for 2 months. There's nothing. It wasn't until then that Rainey finally decides to tell me, hey, you should try out Miller's Bay. And the thing that was, and this is also a picture of Kimberly Point Park, but that's just kind of like an example of what I'm looking at for areas. These are also some other, this is also what I saw at Kimberly Point Park, but a lot of birds, there's no tundra swans there. It's just a bunch of other birds they might recognize, so like mallard ducks and geese and cormorants, bull mice. And I also went to Heckrot, which in hindsight wasn't really a good idea because everything was frozen over. But I saw a cool bull there. More Heckrot pictures. Again, probably should have put more hindsight, but it's kind of cool seeing stuff there. So definitely learned more about planning ahead when it comes to these things. Now, almost consistently in every single area that I was looking for tundra swans, these guys, common goldknives, were everywhere. There were hundreds of them, actually easily more than 200 at a time at Kimberly Point. The thing that's kind of cool about them is that they kind of make this kind of funny frog sound, and they dramatically throw their head back sometimes. I don't know much about them, but I think it's some sort of weird display. But you can see in the back hundreds of them, but not a single swan. Now, when I first tried Miller's Bay, I got incredibly lucky. On my first try, I saw tundra swans. Me and my dad were kind of driving around along Lake Winnebago down there, and we weren't having much luck, but we kept on driving by. And I looked at the sky, and this is actually my first time seeing a tundra swan. And they're just flying there. After looking for nearly 3 months, my first try at Miller's Bay, I found them. And it wasn't just that either. I actually saw about 2 other flocks there. And one thing I definitely learned is that when you go birding or herping, if you know about what you're looking for, it's far more rewarding. Because most of the time, if you see a bird, you're gonna think, oh, cool looking bird, and then you walk away. I've learned that if you learn more about a certain animal, you're gonna learn to appreciate it more. So it was definitely really rewarding. Now I've probably gone on and on about my project process, so this is my non-written. This is more specifically about the swans. as those were actually turned into most of my research was about the swans. But, yeah. Crap, it's not loud enough.
Swans. Big, white, majestic birds that have the mentality of a small dog, as Cindy put it. When I was little, I always kind of assumed that they were basically giant geese, which they kind of are. But there's more to them below the surface. Anyways, in this video, I'm going to focus on the swan species found in Wisconsin. The trumpeter swan, tundra swan, and mute swan. The only species that isn't named is the mute swan, which got its name because it's less vocal compared to other swans. They were introduced by European immigrants in the late 1800s. And in typical European fashion, they released these swans because they were seeking to add familiar wildlife to their ponds and gardens. Mute swans can easily be pointed out from other swans by their orange bill and black fleshy knob thingy on the top of their bill. As to what mute swans do, they outcompete with local wildlife for resources and just sit around because they don't migrate. In one freak accident in 2012, a man named Anthony Hensley, father of two, drowned from the mute swans because the mute swan was probably protecting its nest site. What makes the situation even worse is that the swans knew him because he worked for a company that supplied swans to chase off geese, and he was assigned to be the caretaker. Unlike mute swans, trumpeter swans got their name from their calls being described as resonant, deep, loud, and trumpet-like. They're also larger, being the largest waterfowl species native to North America, with a wingspan reaching over 7 feet. Like other swan species, they are territorial of their nests. Adults perform triumph displays by facing each other and quivering their wings while trumpeting loudly after they successfully chase something off. Tundra swans, also known as whistling swans. They look very similar to trumpeter swans, but there are a few key differences. One difference being a distinct yellow spot in front of the eye found in 80% of tundra swans. Another difference is size, being slightly smaller, but the best way to distinguish them is by their calls. Unlike the deep calls of the trumpeter swan, tundra swans have a high-pitched, quavering call, like my pubescent brother when I step on his foot. Unlike trumpeter and mute swans, tundra swans have a massive range due to migratory habits. During the summer, they can be found in tundra lakes, rivers, bays, estuaries, and flooded fields. Their summer diet mainly consists of stems, seeds, and roots of aquatic plants, like sedges, pondweeds, arrowleafs, algae, and other plants, with a side of small invertebrates. During winter migration, tundra swans can be found on shallow lakes, wide, slow-moving rivers, and coastal estuaries with nearby agricultural fields. When migrating, tundra swans have adapted to eat leftover crop seeds and grain in open fields. Migration. Migration for tundra swans starts in mid-autumn. Starting as north as Alaska, tundra swans make a long 1,001-kilometer migration southward during the winter. Although the distance can vary between the different flyways, which divides the tundra swan populations into two sections, the western and the eastern. The maximum height that tundra swans can fly is 6,000 feet, which is 2.2 times higher than the world's tallest building in Dubai. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, but it's a big building in Dubai. When conditions are favorable, the maximum speed of 160 kilometers per hour, or 100 miles per hour. As to why they migrate, we don't exactly know. The most concrete theory being is that it's just for survival. But migrating can be costly because it uses up so much energy to the point it can lower reproduction rates. Another one of the costs being that the more energy reserves you have, the higher the rate of predation. Another cost is generally a higher death rate because depending on how far you have to go, you may encounter more challenges. Greenberg Russell, an ornithologist and founder of the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center, proposed that migratory birds face a trade-off. The further a bird travels, the better the wintering grounds. But this means less time spent on breeding grounds, thus lower production rates. I tried to get data to calculate the mortality rate of migratory birds because each bird species is different, and may spend different amounts of time breeding in wintering grounds. This also applies to tundra swans because of the two different flyaways they can take. So you can imagine that trying to calculate the mortality rate is a nightmare. Though according to a study in 2016, some scientists slapped some trackers on 50 or so tundra swans and set them free to see what would happen. Turns out there really isn't a difference in mortality rates between the eastern and the western populations, aside from the higher mortality rates of the younger swans. Still, that doesn't really answer the question as to why tundra swans migrate such a large distance.
And that was it. That was the result of kind of like a culmination of a bunch of other projects I've done here at VNS. Like my animation project I did once. I also did a live streaming project once, which I hate to this day. But it's progress, I guess. No, not again. Not again.
Play it again.
No, I'm not playing it again. At the end of all this, I'm hoping that I graduate on time, and I plan to go to the UW Stevens Point for forestry or something along the lines of that. And I also want to give thanks to my life sources, Nathaniel Frank from MT Toxins and Allison Nelson from the DNR. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions? V?
Why are you so silly?
The question was, why am I so silly? I don't think before I speak sometimes. Adrian?
If you could redo this project all over again, what would you change?
The question was, if I could redo this project, what would I change? It would probably be more, I mean, I already planned a lot for this project beforehand, but I do wish I had some more anticipation for a lot of things. Because I didn't feel prepared even though I was, or I was at the very least tried to prepare. Yeah. Jack?
What's your advice for future seniors?
The question was, what's my advice for future seniors? And that would just be, just do your schoolwork. I don't really have a good answer for this. It's just try and follow what's been told and you'll be fine. Just keep on going. I mean, there's always gonna be unexpected things that are gonna happen no matter how much you prepare yourself for, so just keep on going.
What is your biggest challenge of the whole project?
This question was, what was my biggest challenge? I would probably say the production phase. Even though I really like animating and stuff, I did not get enough footage, and one of my plans was to make a documentary, and that was definitely not gonna happen. Even though I tried for 3 months. Any other questions? Dexter?
How long did it take for you to make that animation?
The question was how long it took me to make that animation. It definitely did depend at times, because most of the time I was animating at 12 FPS, frames per second. And even then, I wasn't really making an animatic beforehand. So some days it could probably take like 2 hours, some days maybe more, so probably like 4. Corbin?
Do you think you'd be Raimi level of birding yet?
The question was, do I think I'd be Raimi level of birding yet? No! No, I don't go out in -5 degrees to look for birds. I'm not, like I enjoy being outside, but I'm not, I have a limit. Ms. Lukey.
migration patterns of swans? Are there any recent changes in there?
The question was, is there any changes in the migration patterns of swans? For this is more of an educated guess for me. There probably is, because they do take the two different routes, but the routes are probably gonna be different every time. Because like I said, they randomly just take warm air drafts and fly with it. Yeah. Aiden?
What's your relationship with swans?
My relationship with swans, I mean, I don't really interact with them as much as I did with geese. I mean, I just find them kind of interesting, I guess, at one point.
Favorite bird?
Sim asked what my favorite bird was. It kind of depends. If you're gonna ask me about like domesticated bird, I'm gonna have to go with doves because you can pet them, unlike parrots. Because they get yeah. If you know enough about parrots, you know what I'm talking about. Trying to think. I mean, at this point, I'd have to say snow buntings because they just look cute and they're kind of cool because they actually migrate nocturnally, which you kind of think would be counterproductive because birds are known for the really good eyesight. So why would a bird travel in pitch black night? Apparently, they have a way of navigating in the night. I don't remember what it was called, but magnetism, something along the lines of that. Yeah. Even again.
Personal opinion on owls.
The question was my personal opinion on owls. They're fine.
Okay, based on your research, how many swans do you think you could take in a fight, realistically?
The question was, how many swans could I take on in a fight realistically? It can depend. I've seen a video of a Canadian goose breaking glass by a wing flap because it was probably seeing its reflection and it got annoyed. Swans are bigger. I mean, their bites probably wouldn't be very fun, but you can easily take out a goose or a swan probably by grabbing the neck. Actually, their main defense for geese and swans is actually kind of like thinking of like a smaller dog. They use aggression. They're all bark, no bite. I mean, they can bite. They will if they have to, but they can't do really permanent damage, really.
Okay, but give us a number.
Yeah, come on. Thanks.
Probably 5 at once, I would say. If I have like a stick or something, easily 5, but it depends. What?
Like, what do you have to bird watch?
What do I have to bird watch?
Camera or?
You don't really necessarily need a camera or binoculars. Apparently, according to Rainby, that is anyways, a lot of birding is actually hearing things, because depending on what you're looking for, if it's like a smaller bird, you're probably not going to see it very easily if it's in the summer where there's a bunch of brush. So it's a lot of hearing things. It also doesn't help that some bird species actually mimic other species, so that can make some things difficult. But it all depends on where you are and what you're specifically looking for. Aiden?
Favorite season?
Favorite season? Winter and summer specifically. Why? Spring and fall suck because I hate how wet they are. Ms. Lukey?
Is there any controversy surrounding environmental television?
The question was, is there any controversy surrounding environmental television? There actually is quite a lot. After Steve Irwin's death, even though he specifically didn't want people going after stingrays, there were a lot of reports of people killing stingrays for like a good year afterwards. And there's also some people concerned about misinformation or over dramatization. I can't pronounce the word. That definitely happens a lot in modern media. Like I've actually been a victim to that, where I was really upset over a area being sold for oil, and turns out no one was really interested in the area. It was just blew up out of proportion. So that happens.
Can I ask a follow-up to that?
Yeah.
What are some qualifiers of effective environmental TV?
I mean, the question was, what are good examples of effective environmental TV? I guess having people more aware about what's near you, because a lot of the time, a lot of people hear about like polar bears and stuff, but like actually, Allison specifically was worried about animals in people's backyards, because you can actually do more about that than say polar bears. Because you can actually physically do something, not just pay to an organization and spread the word. You can actually physically, like, put down birdhouses, you can plant native plants. You can do a lot more in your backyard than the other solution. I mean, you can still do both, but, Mom?
That being said, what are your feelings on house sparrows?
The question was, what are my feelings on house sparrows? It has changed a little bit over time, because apparently their numbers are decreasing. It's not just the range that they're native to. So it's kind of iffy. I mean, I still don't necessarily like them, but it's not their fault they're here, so.
But they are invasive.
I mean, yeah. But you can't specifically hate a species because they just exist. You just know that you have to move them out of the area because it's affecting other things normally. Aiden?
Okay, what are the major differences between swans and geese?
Okay, the question was the major differences between swans and geese, size and color. I mean, it's pretty obvious to see. Not to be mean or anything, but it's just there's a massive size and color difference, as well as range can vary. Behavioral, I'm not so sure about that, but probably pretty similar. Sim?
I don't know if you got too much information on this, but what is the like greatest enemy to preservation?
Sim asked what's the greatest enemy to, it was preservation or conservation? Wait.
There's a difference.
The greatest threat I would say is probably misinformation is probably one of the biggest threats, because misinformation can easily imbalance things. Like let's say a organization pushes people to plant a certain species of flower, and let's say thousands of people do that at once. That's gonna immediately send an imbalance to a ecosystem. That's just one example. Yeah. Any other questions? Or is that all? Ms. Leakey?
Did your writing process develop in this project?
Ms. Leakey's question has my writing process developed in this project? I personally despise writing, but with writing, it's kind of iffy. I don't like writing long paragraphs. I like to take my information chunk at a time. I mean, over time, I've actually reused rationales and turned them into Google Slides instead of a full document, because seeing whole walls of text, I kind of get lost in the words and I kind of space out. I like seeing chunks of information at a time. That being said, I also love to read on my phone, so it's kind of in between.
Ms. Blow.
Yep, I'm sorry, I forgot. I'm just out of it.
Can we go back to your notes page perchance, and you shared, like how you had laid it out with each, but what, like, can into that a little more and just see like, how did you organize the notes within, because we saw the little, the sheets named.
Yeah, most of the time, I've been told multiple times, I don't remember who said this, but I've been told multiple times, you should color code your notes by specifically what they're about. Like from Wikipedia, for example, you know, you can have like habitat and then behavior and then all that other stuff. I don't really do that, which I probably should, but I just want to get stuff written down. But most of the time, I just write down what I find important. This is actually one of the very few cases I actually did color code, which was because of the species differences. This is swans, Wisconsin, from the DNR. And it's just easier to keep everything in one spot. To me, it's just easier instead of just color coding everything. Because I've noticed when it comes to typing notes and writing them, because I used to write my notes, writing notes is easier to memorize. Typing them, for some reason, I don't remember them as well. So it actually kind of helps forcing myself to reread my notes instead of color coding them and then like, oh, there I go. This just helps me remember to reread them. Aiden, again.
Okay, so what's like an interesting thing or a few interesting things you learned for you to get the chance to tell us in this presentation?
Aiden's question was something interesting that I wasn't able to say in this presentation. I have to think about that. I can't think of one at the moment. I'll probably remember it later and then I'll forget to tell you. Any more questions?